The sun hung low over the dusty plains when the rumor finally reached the ranch that morning. Folks whispered it from porch to porch, trading looks of disbelief as they spoke of the cowboy who had stunned the entire county with a single quiet choice. In a land where beauty carried weight and social standing decided almost everything. He had turned away from the sister every man admired and walked instead toward the one everyone else avoided. People said it was madness. Others called it stubbornness, but no one understood the truth. No one knew what stirred inside him, though. Night he first saw her standing alone under the lantern glow with her hands trembling and her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she had learned to expect nothing good from life out by the open range. The air carried the scent of dry grass and distant pine as Talon rode along the fence line of his land. A calm man by nature, he kept to himself and rarely gave reason for town gossip. He had strength in his shoulders and honesty in his voice, the kind of presence that made folks trust him without trying. Women noticed him, of course, and the admired sister noticed him most of all. She moved through town with polished grace, the kind people praised. Her hair always pinned just right, her dress always the newest style brought by the traders from far cities. Whenever he walked into the general store, she would turn her smile toward him, bright and warm, the kind that drew men like bees to honey. Everyone expected he would choose her when the time came. It felt natural to them, obvious. But Talon's eyes had drifted elsewhere long before that. The sister no one wanted stood on the edges of life like a quiet shadow. Her name was Raina, and she carried a kind of stillness that people misunderstood. She did not dress in fancy cloth or wear ribbons in her hair. Her hands were marked with work, her gaze calm but cautious. She never pushed herself into a room. She waited at the edges, as if she believed she wasn't meant for the center. Some folks said she was too plain, others said she was strange. But Talon saw a different kind of beauty in her, something steady, something real. It was in the way she held her ground even when people talked. It was in the way she guarded her younger siblings without asking anyone for help. It was in the quiet strength she hid deep inside, the kind of strength only a man who looked beyond the surface would notice. That morning, as word of Talon's choice spread like wildfire, Raina stayed inside the small room she used for stitching work. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. She had not asked for his attention, nor expected it. But she had felt something shift the night he stepped between her and a group of drunken ranch hands who tried to mock her outside the feed barn. Talon had stood with a firmness that silenced every laugh. One glance from him had been enough to send those men stumbling away. After that, she couldn't forget the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with a kind of recognition. As if he could see the storm she hid behind her steady eyes. Her sister Lyra, however, was furious. She could not understand why any man would overlook her when she had always been the one lifted up, praised, chosen. She had been raised to expect admiration. To her, Raina's quiet presence had never been competition. And yet here she stood, watching Talon speak softly to the one woman she thought least deserving. The feeling of rejection stung her pride more than her heart. She did not love Talon, but she wanted the world to see her as the desired one. The one cowboys trailed after, the one who never lost. Raina felt the tension before she saw it. When she stepped onto the open yard that afternoon, she found Lyra standing stiff as a post while Talon approached from the corral. Dust on his boots and sun on his shoulders. His expression softened when he saw Raina, and that single shift in his eyes sent Lyra's anger burning deeper. The ranch seemed to hold its breath as the three of them came to a slow, uneasy standstill, the wide land stretching behind them. Like a canvas waiting for fate to paint its next stroke, Talon took a step closer to Raina, people watching. From the porch whispered that the cowboy had made his choice with no hesitation, that he wanted the cast-aside sister, the one life had overlooked. Raina's heart thudded, unsure whether she should stay or step back. She had never been chosen before. She had spent years believing her path was meant to be quiet, unnoticed, unclaimed. Now this man was standing in front of her with a calm certainty that frightened her more than any insult she had faced. "I don't understand," she whispered, unable to hold his steady gaze. You don't have to, he answered. Not yet. Lyra let out a breath sharp enough to cut the air. She forced a smile onto her face, hiding her humiliation behind practiced grace. Talon, you're making a mistake, she said. You know how people will talk? You know what they'll say? I know what they already say, he replied without looking at her. And I don't live my life according to their voices. Reyna felt her throat tighten. She had lived under those voices for as long as she could remember. She knew how cruel they could be. She knew choosing her meant Talon would face the same harsh whispers she had carried alone for years. Part of her wanted to tell him to turn around, to save himself from what others would think. Part of her wanted to believe she deserved someone who saw her truth. Someone who noticed the quiet strength she worked so hard to hide. The land around them shimmered with heat. And the old ranch house waited in silence, holding secrets of the past and hints of the future inside its weathered walls. A storm of emotion passed through the air like a wind, ready to shift everything in its path. The choice Talon made was more than affection. It was a rebellion against the rules of their world, a declaration that worth did not come from beauty or praise, but from the soul beneath it. Lyra stepped closer, her voice trembling with anger. Talon, don't forget who I am to this town. Don't forget who she is. You're choosing a life of ridicule. You're choosing someone no one else would stand beside. He turned his face toward her with a calm sharp enough to stop her words. Maybe that's why she deserves someone who will. Reyna felt something inside her shift, a fragile hope she had buried long ago rising like a small flame. But fear rose with it. Fear of hurting Lyra, fear of failing Talon, fear of stepping into a future she never imagined for herself. The moment stretched between them, heavy, trembling, uncertain. Then the sound of approaching hooves broke the silence. Riders were coming fast, their figures growing larger across the open plain. Dust swirled behind them in a cloud that rose like warning smoke. Talon narrowed his eyes, tension pulling across his jaw. Folks did not ride like that unless trouble followed close behind. Reyna felt a cold weight sink into her stomach. She had seen that kind of ride before. It never meant anything good. The riders slowed only when they reached the gate, horses breathing hard, their faces tight with urgency. One of them shouted Talon's name, his voice carrying across the yard with a force that made even Lyra's anger falter. Whatever news those men brought, it would change everything. And the choice Talon had made moments earlier would be tested in ways none of them were ready to face. The truth was coming faster than any of them expected, and the path ahead was already shifting beneath their feet. The riders reined in hard, dust rising around their boots as they swung down with urgency written across their faces. Talon stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Reyna by instinct, not to shield her from the men but from the weight of whatever message they carried. The leader of the riders, a broad man named Hoxon, wiped sweat from his brow and looked from Talon to the two sisters as if he had walked straight into a moment he was not supposed to interrupt, but the news pressing on him left no room for hesitation. We need your eyes on the North Ridge, Hoxon said, his voice low and tense. Tracks were found up there. Fresh ones. Not cattle. Not horses either. Talon's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the distant ridge, its rough edges rising like a warning against the sky. The land beyond it was wild and barely touched, a place where only the most desperate or determined men traveled. Trouble had a habit of creeping in from that direction. When did you find them? Talon asked. Just an hour ago, Hoxon replied. Wide as a boot, but deeper. Heavy weight. Someone is moving through your land, and they don't care to hide it. Reyna felt a cold shiver crawl along her arms. Tracks alone did not frighten her, but the unease in Hoxon's voice did. Talon had spent years watching over these lands, fixing fences, driving off thieves, keeping peace where peace rarely lasted. For someone to cross into his territory so boldly meant whoever it was carried confidence or desperation. Neither brought comfort. Lyra finally spoke, though her voice lacked the anger she held moments earlier. Are you sure it's not one of the ranch hands from the next property? She asked. Hoxon shook his head. No hand I know carries steps like that. And whoever made them did not travel alone. 2 sets of tracks, both heavy. Talon looked toward the porch where a few neighbors stood silently watching. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of cedar and dust. He had been expecting something to stir sooner or later, but not today. Not in the middle of the storm he had created by choosing Reyna over her sister. Hoxton lowered his voice. "We could use you up there. The ridge bends toward your canyon, and that's the last place we need strangers hiding." Talon nodded. "Give me a moment." Hoxton stepped back to his horse, leaving Talon in the quiet space between the sisters. Reyna felt the air thicken again, but this time with worry rather than jealousy. Talon turned toward her, his eyes steady and calm as always, yet carrying a weight he rarely revealed. "You'll be safe here," he said. Reyna's breath caught. "Why do you say it like something might happen?" "'Cause something is happening," Talon replied. "I don't know what yet, but I know danger when it moves across land like that." Lyra crossed her arms, her expression a mix of concern and bitterness. "So now we have strangers roaming the ridge, and you're ready to run off like you always do." Talon met her gaze without flinching. "Protecting land isn't running off. You know that." She looked away, lips tight, as if she wanted to argue but knew she couldn't. The truth was, Talon had always taken responsibility for the safety of the surrounding ranches. Even before his father passed and left the land entirely to him, Lyra had admired that once. Today it only added to the sting of rejection. Reyna stepped forward, her voice quiet. "Be careful. Just because they came from the ridge doesn't mean they plan to leave the same way." Talon looked at her more softly than before, almost surprised that she read his concerns so clearly. "That's what worries me," he said. "Someone walking heavy through dry ground isn't passing through. They're looking for something." She felt her chest flutter at his words, though not from fear alone. Talon spoke with a kind of certainty that made her believe he understood more than he shared. People often dismissed her instincts, but he listened. He always listened. "I'll return before sunset," he added. "Stay near the house until then." He threw one last look at the ridge, then mounted his horse in a smooth motion. As he rode away with Hoxton and the others, the dust trailing behind them faded into the wind. Leaving a quiet stillness over the yard, Lyra stood rigid beside Reyna, the silence stretching between them like a rope about to snap. She watched Talon's figure disappear into the shimmering distance, her frustration simmering again. "You don't even understand what you're stepping into," Lyra suddenly said, her voice trembling. "You were never meant to be part of someone like him. You don't belong in that world." Reyna took a steady breath. "I didn't ask to belong," she answered. "And he didn't choose me because I tried to be something I'm not." Lyra's eyes flashed. "He embarrassed me today. Do you know what that means for me? People will think I'm not enough." "That isn't true," Reyna replied gently. "People already look at you with admiration. Talon choosing me changes nothing about who you are." "It changes everything," Lyra snapped. "And you know it." Reyna lowered her gaze. She understood her sister's pain more deeply than Lyra realized. Their lives had been shaped by expectations, unspoken comparisons, and a town that watched every misstep. But this choice was not about competition. It was about the quiet connection that had been building between her and Talon long before anyone noticed. She walked toward the porch, needing space to breathe. Lyra followed, unwilling to let the conversation drop. "Talon may think he knows you," Lyra said, "but he doesn't know the things people whisper. He doesn't understand why some folks keep their distance." Reyna paused at the steps. "If he decides he wants to know, I'll tell him. If he walks away after that, then so be it." Lyra stared at her as if searching for weakness. "And what about the past?" she asked. "What about everything you've kept hidden?" Reyna's heart tightened, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "The past is mine to carry, not yours to use." Lyra flinched as though the words struck her, then turned sharply and walked off toward the barn, leaving Reyna alone with the uneasy wind. Inside the house, shadows settled across the wooden floors, and the sound of distant hooves echoed faintly in Reyna's mind. She had spent years avoiding trouble, keeping to the quiet corners of life, working hard and speaking little. Yet trouble had a way of finding her, no matter how small she made herself. She wondered if Talon sensed that, or if he believed she came without weight. The truth was far more tangled. She moved to the window, looking toward the ridge where Talon had disappeared. The land stretched endlessly, holding memories she wished she could bury and fears she tried to forget. The North Ridge especially carried a piece of her past she never spoke of, a place where she once stood face to face with a choice that haunted her still. Back then, she was younger, uncertain, caught in a storm not of her making. Someone had followed her through the tall grass, heavy steps, and shallow breath. Someone who did not come with kindness. She escaped only because a passing traveler shouted and scared him off. No one ever found the man. No one believed her story fully. And over time, people whispered that she had imagined it, that no such danger had existed. But the terror she felt that day never left her bones, and now heavy tracks appeared, again near the same ridge. Her fingers trembled as she held the edge of the window frame. Was it possible the past had returned? Or was someone else moving with a purpose she could not yet see? Outside, the wind picked up, carrying a faint echo of distant thunder, though the sky remained clear. Raina felt her breath catch. She wanted to warn Talon, to tell him the truth she had kept hidden for so long, but she feared the weight it might place on him. She feared he would see her as broken, fragile, unable to stand on her own. She stepped away from the window and moved toward the table where scraps of fabric lay half-stitched from her morning work. But her hands could not steady enough to continue. The quiet of the house now felt too wide, too hollow. By late afternoon, neighbors drifted away, and the ranch yard grew still again. Only Lyra remained outside, pacing near the barn with restless energy, glancing toward the ridge as if waiting for something to happen. She would never admit it. But fear had lodged itself beneath her pride as well. As the sun sank lower, the sky turned copper at the edges. Still no sign of Talon. Raina stepped onto the porch, her heart tightening with each passing minute. This land had many dangers. Some were obvious, some were hidden, and some were tied to secrets only she carried. The silence deepened, stretching with unease, until a distant figure appeared along the ridge path. But it was only one rider. Not Talon, not Hawkson. And whoever it was rode with slow, deliberate caution, as if making sure he was not followed. Raina felt the hairs on her arms rise, because she recognized that silhouette it belonged to someone she never expected to see again. And the moment his horse reached the edge of the yard, Raina understood that the trouble Talon rode out to find had already arrived at her door. The rider slowed as he neared the yard, the hooves of his horse digging softly into the dust. Raina stood frozen on the porch, unable to move or call out. She knew that figure. The tilt of his shoulders, the way he held the reins, the faint tension in his posture, as if he expected someone to leap out at him. Years had passed, yet the sight of him stirred the same uneasy pull in her chest. A memory half buried, but never fully forgotten. The man drew his horse to a stop and lifted his gaze. His eyes locked with Raina's, and whatever words she expected him to say did not come. Instead, he dipped his chin with a slow, measured greeting. "Didn't expect to ever ride this way again," he said. His voice had gained weight since she last heard it. Raina felt her breath thin. "Orion," she whispered. Lyra heard the name and strode toward the porch, wiping sweat and dust from her hands. She looked him over with sharp curiosity, unaware of the history carved between him and her sister. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to mask the nervous tremor in her tone. Orion stepped down from his horse, boots hitting the ground with a thud that made Raina's pulse jump. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair pulled back neatly, his face marked by sun and travel. "Just a man passing through," he answered, but his eyes never left Raina. Lyra frowned. "Raina, you know him." Raina said nothing. She could barely trust her own voice. Orion placed his hat against his side and took a slow step forward. "You always knew silence better than speech," he said softly. The porch wood creaked beneath Raina's feet as she backed up half a step, not from fear alone, but from the storm rising inside her. She had prayed she would never see him again, prayed the past would not follow her into the fragile life she was building. Yet here he was, standing on Talon's land, appearing on the same day danger stirred on the North Ridge. It felt too close to coincidence. "What brings you here?" she finally managed, her voice steady but quiet. Orion glanced toward the ridge. "I saw the tracks," he said. "Figured trouble was moving. Thought I should warn you." Lyra folded her arms. "Warn us about what?" Orion looked at her with a calm that bordered on cold. "There are men riding through this county who don't care who gets hurt. They're searching for something. Or someone." Raina felt her stomach tighten. "And you think they'll come here?" "No, they will," Orion said. Lyra stepped closer, her expression sharp with suspicion. "How would you know that?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Raina with a heaviness she wished she didn't understand. It was the look of a man carrying guilt, a man with too many secrets, a man who had once stood behind her on the North Ridge when she thought she would not make it out alive. Raina forced her voice out. "Orion, those tracks, are they connected to you?" His jaw worked before he spoke. "They might be. Men like them don't forget old debts." Lyra's eyes widened. "Old debts to you or to her?" He didn't respond. That silence was enough. Raina stepped down from the porch, needing to face him without the barrier of wood between them. "You should not have come here," she said. "Talon is out there searching for whoever is moving through the ridge. If what you're saying is true, he's walking right into it." "That's why I came," Orion replied. "He won't know what he's dealing with." Lyra glanced between them, frustrated by the half-spoken truths. "Someone better explain this. Who are these men? And why would they come after our land?" Orion took a slow breath. "They are trackers. Skilled ones. They move for coin and pride. Years ago, they were hunting someone and crossed this land. I got in their way. They didn't take it kindly. Let's just say I left them with a reason to come looking again." "And they followed you here," Raina said. "Yes, and they won't stop now." Raina closed her eyes briefly. Talon was out there with Hawkson, riding straight toward the danger she had never spoken of. She longed to warn him, but he was too far to hear her voice. The weight of her silence threatened to suffocate her. She should have told Talon everything long ago. She should have spoken of the night Orion had stepped between her and a stranger with a heavy stride and a cruel grip. She should have told him how Orion had saved her, how the stranger escaped, how the county whispered that she imagined the whole thing. And worst of all, she should have told him that Orion's involvement had not ended that night. There were layers she kept buried. Layers Orion never dared reveal either. Lyra stepped between them. "If these men are coming, we need to act instead of standing here talking. Raina, you can't stay outside. Orion, if you brought danger to our gates, you should leave." He shook his head. "Leaving won't help you. They already know this land is tied to me. They'll come whether I'm here or not. Better I stay." Raina heard truth in his tone, and something else. A quiet determination that made her uneasy. Orion had always been the type to carry burdens alone. He would face danger without blinking, even if it meant stepping into a fire he barely escaped last time. Lyra huffed in frustration. "This is Talon's land. He should decide, not you." "That's why I'm waiting for him," Orion replied. But Raina knew waiting might be too late, as the sun dipped lower. The sky transformed into a blend of gold and rust. Raina walked to the fence edge, trying to calm the unease boiling inside her. She could not stop chewing on a single fear. What if the men from her past recognized her? What if they remembered her face and the night she ran? What if they believed she was the reason Orion interfered? The thought made her skin crawl. Behind her, Orion and Lyra spoke in tense exchanges. Lyra wanted him gone. Orion insisted on staying. Neither knew how to handle the danger creeping closer. Raina's gaze drifted to a lone hawk circling above the ridge. She wondered if Talon saw it too. If he felt the same warning rise inside, she wished she could reach him across the distance and tell him everything she had kept hidden as she watched the horizon. A memory surfaced. The night she met Orion had been colder than the usual spring air. She remembered walking home from the trading post as shadows stretched across the tall grass. She heard heavy steps behind her, and panic had clawed up through her chest. When she turned, she saw a stranger's silhouette, wide-shouldered, moving with steady intent. She tried to run, but the ground felt uneven beneath her. Just as the stranger reached for her, Orion came from the darkness, shouting loud enough to startle even the moon. The stranger fled, leaving only broken grass and the echo of breath behind him. No one ever found him. No one believed her fear. Some thought Orion exaggerated. Others claimed it was a misunderstanding. Some even blamed Reyna for being out so late alone. The county held its opinions. Reyna held the truth. Now Orion's presence stirred all those memories. Like dust rising after a long silence, Lyra approached the fence quietly. "Why didn't you ever tell me the full story?" she asked. Reyna kept her eyes on the ridge. "Because no one wanted the full story. They preferred their own." "So the danger he brought then is the danger coming now," Lyra said, her voice gentler than before. "Yes," Reyna whispered. Lyra leaned against the fence. "And Talon doesn't know any of this," Reyna said. "But he will." They both knew the moment Talon returned, the truth would have to rise between them. Secrets could not survive the kind of danger that was brewing. As the two sisters stood there, Orion approached from behind. "I saw smoke on the south side," he said. "Small, controlled. Someone is signaling." Reyna turned sharply. "Signaling who?" "Each other," Orion said. "They travel in pairs. If one is near the ridge, the other could be circling the canyon." Lyra sucked in a breath. "They're surrounding us." "For now," Orion said. "They're not attacking, just watching, studying, waiting." "For what?" Reyna asked. "For weakness," Orion replied. Reyna's spine went cold. Talon was out there with no idea how calculated these men were. She looked back toward the ridge. Wishing she could see more than the fading sunlight, the ground vibrated faintly. It was distant, but unmistakable. More riders not from the ridge, from the opposite direction. Orion's eyes narrowed. "That isn't Talon." Reyna felt her heartbeat drop into a heavy, fearful rhythm. Lyra grabbed her arm. "Who else would come here at this hour?" Orion reached for his rifle, calm but tense. "Whoever they are, they're coming with purpose." Reyna stared at the rising dust cloud as the riders approached faster, closer, without hesitation. And in that moment, she understood something. Chilling, the men Talon went looking for were not the only threat. Another group had been following a different trail, a trail that led straight to her, and now they were nearly here. The dust cloud rose higher as the riders thundered closer, their silhouettes cutting sharp lines against the fading light. Reyna gripped the edge of the fence, her breath catching as each second stretched thin and heavy. Lyra stood beside her, tense as a drawn bow. Orion moved ahead of them, rifle steady, but held low. Watching every shift in the riders' formation, the approaching group did not slow. They rode with precision, the kind that came from long miles and a single purpose. When they finally pulled up at the gate, the yard fell silent, except for the crunch of gravel under hooves. For men, hard faces, weathered coats, eyes scanning the land with the sharpness of hawks. One man pushed his hat back and let his gaze settle on Reyna. Something cold flickered in his eyes. "Recognition, there she is," he said quietly. "Looks just the same." Reyna's throat tightened until she thought she might choke on the air. Lyra turned sharply to her, confusion and fear mixing in her expression. Orion stepped forward a fraction, blocking the men's view. "You should turn around," Orion said. "This land isn't yours." The man smiled, but it held no warmth. "Still protecting her, Orion? After all this time?" Orion's jaw tightened. "She doesn't concern you." "Oh, but she does," the man replied. "We've been searching a long time. Tracks led us through the ridge and down the canyon. Saw the smoke signal. Figured you'd be circling back to her." Reyna's skin prickled with cold. These were not the same men from the ridge. There were more. Multiple groups moving with intention. This was bigger than she imagined. Lyra stepped closer to Reyna, almost instinctively. "What do they want with her?" she demanded. The man lifted his gaze, eyes narrowing. Truth. Reyna felt her knees weaken. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, but running would only confirm their suspicions. She forced herself to stand firm. "I don't know you," she said quietly. The man tilted his head. "Maybe not. But you know the one who sent us?" Every sound in the yard seemed to fade until only the wind remained. Reyna swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. There was only one person who could command men like these, a name she had tried to erase from her memory. Orion stepped forward again, tension radiating off him. "You won't touch her," he said. The man smirked. "Last time you said that, Orion, we ended up with broken ribs and a fire in the meadow. This time, we brought numbers." The man gestured behind him. A fifth rider appeared on the horizon, moving slower, deliberate, as if assessing the scene before joining it. The sight made Reyna's stomach twist. From the porch, a neighbor peeked out and immediately ducked back inside. Fear traveled fast across open land. Orion kept his voice steady. "She isn't the one you're after. Leave her out of it." "That depends," the man said, "on whether she's willing to talk." Reyna shook her head. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then we'll wait," the man replied. People talk when pressure builds, and pressure is coming. Especially when Talon finds out who's standing in his yard. The sound of Talon's name slipping from the stranger's mouth sent a sharp jolt through. Lyra stepped forward. Angrily, "Talon won't let you threaten." "Anyone on his land?" she snapped. The man chuckled. "If he makes it back before dark, we'll see." Reyna felt the words hit like a physical blow. The idea that Talon was out there, possibly heading into an ambush, tightened every muscle in her body. She looked desperately toward the ridge, wishing for even the faintest sign of him. Orion lifted his rifle slightly. "You need to leave," he said again, firmer this time. "You don't want this fight." The man's smirk faded. "We didn't come for a fight." "Not yet." His eyes slid back to Reyna, studying her with unsettling calm. "We came for answers, and we'll be close enough to hear them when she finally speaks." The men turned their horses and rode toward the canyon, not far enough to be gone, but far enough to watch unseen. A threat placed carefully on the horizon. As their silhouettes faded, Reyna's strength finally wavered. She leaned against the fence, her breath shaking. Lyra rushed to her side. "What answers are they talking about?" Lyra whispered, voice trembling. "Reyna, what is happening?" Orion lowered his rifle and exhaled slowly. "You should both come inside." Reyna's voice cracked. "Talon needs to know. If he rides into them without warning—" "He won't," Orion interrupted. "Hawkson is too careful for that." "But I agree. Talon needs the truth now." Lyra swallowed hard. "Tell us then." "Before he gets here—" Reyna hesitated, her heart pounding with old fear. She had spent years hiding the truth because she believed speaking it would bring more trouble than silence. But that silence had led her here, cornered on the land she hoped would give her peace. She nodded and walked toward the house, her steps slow and unsteady. Inside, the wooden floor creaked softly under her weight. Orion and Lyra followed, their shadows stretching long across the dim room. Reyna sat at the table, fingers twisting nervously. Lyra took the chair beside her. Orion stayed near the door, watching the yard through the narrow window. Reyna took a breath that felt heavy enough to break her. "Years ago, before I came to this side of the county, I worked at a small trading post near the south border. The place didn't have much protection. Men wandered through from all directions. One of them started watching me. I didn't know his name. I didn't want to. He waited for moments when I was alone. He tried to corner me more than once." Lyra's face softened with worry. "One night, he followed me up the ridge trail. I knew something was wrong. His footsteps were heavy, measured. Ow!" Reyna shivered. "I tried to run, but the ground was rough. He reached for me. I thought it was over." Orion stepped closer. "That's when I found her." Reyna nodded. Orion scared him off. But the stranger wasn't alone. He had friends. Dangerous ones. They blamed Orion for interfering. They promised to come back for him. And maybe for me. Orion crossed his arms. They moved in shadows, took coin from powerful men. Once they set a target, they rarely stopped. Lyra looked between them. So these men think Reyna knows something? Right. Reyna lowered her gaze. They think I saw something that night. Something important. Something they need. But you didn't, Lyra insisted. I don't know, Reyna whispered. I only remember the fear. Orion shook his head. They don't believe that. They think she's protecting someone. And now they're dragging Talon into it, Reyna said, her voice breaking. He never asked for this. Lyra reached out, squeezing her sister's hand. He chose you. Remember that. Reyna felt tears sting her eyes, but she forced them back. She could not fall apart now, not when danger tightened around them like rope. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the yard. Shadows lengthened. The sky darkened too quickly for comfort. Orion stepped away from the window. We need to be ready. Those men aren't retreating. They're waiting. For what? Lyra asked. For Talon, he said. Reyna stood abruptly. We should go find him. He shouldn't ride into this without knowing. You can't go out there, Orion said. It's too dangerous. They'll see you before you get halfway to the ridge. But he's walking blind, Reyna insisted. And if something happens to him because of my past, I won't live with that. Before she could say more, the distant thunder of hooves rolled across the land. This time, it was not a group, it was one rider, moving fast. Too fast to be calm. Lyra ran to the door. Is it Talon? Orion stepped out onto the porch, rifle ready, but lowered. I can't tell yet. Reyna's heart pounded as the rider drew closer. The setting sun cast a harsh glow across the land, turning the approaching silhouette into a dark, urgent shape. When the rider finally came into view, Reyna felt her breath leave her. It was Hoxen, but Talon was not beside him. Hoxen rode hard into the yard, dust flying as he reined in and nearly fell from his horse. His face was pale, lined with panic. He shouted before anyone reached him. They found him. Reyna's knees buckled, her voice caught. Where is he? Hoxen dragged in a breath. He's alive. But they surrounded him near the canyon bend. They're moving him somewhere. I barely got away. He told me to run ahead and warn you. Orion cursed under his breath. Lyra covered her mouth with shaking hands. Reyna felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Hoxen looked straight at her, fear burning in his eyes. They're not just after him, he said. They were asking for you. Reyna's heart stopped. The men had taken Talon, and now they wanted her in return. The moment stretched tight, heavy, nearly breaking under its own weight. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, she knew the path ahead would force her to face everything. She had tried to outrun because the man she loved was in danger, and the only way to save him was to step directly into the hands of the men who had been hunting her for years. Reyna felt the world narrow to a single thought. Talon had been taken because of her past, a past she never meant to bring into his life. Panic pressed against her chest, but beneath it rose a quiet force she had spent too many years hiding. She had run once. She had stayed silent once. And that silence had nearly cost her everything she cared for. This time, she would not run. Hoxen steadied himself against the porch rail, trying to catch his breath. They moved him toward the canyon forks, he said. They plan to hold him there until they get what they want. Lyra looked sharply at Reyna. What they want is you. Reyna nodded, though fear vibrated through her bones. Then I'm the one who should go. No, Orion said, stepping forward. They won't keep their word if you hand yourself over. They'll take you both. Reyna met his eyes. I know. That is why I need you with me. Orion hesitated. You trust me that much? I trust that you won't let what happened back then happen again, she said. And I trust that you want Talon safe as much as I do. Lyra took Reyna's hand. You can't go alone. I'm coming too. Reyna shook her head gently. No, you need to stay here. If something goes wrong, the land needs someone to speak for Talon, someone to protect this home. Lyra held her sister's hand tighter, her earlier jealousy washed away by fear and love. Promise you'll come back. I promise, Reyna said. Hoxen pushed away from the porch. I'll guide you to the canyon edge. After that, you'll need to move quiet." Orion saddled his horse with quick, practiced movements. Reyna climbed on behind him, her hands gripping the saddle horn as her heart pounded. The sky darkened overhead as they rode out, the dry air carrying the scent of sage and dust. Every hoofbeat echoed the same truth. Talon was out there waiting for her, and she would not let him face danger alone. The canyon fork lay hidden between tall rock walls, each shadow deep and cool. The moon had begun to rise, brushing silver across the ground. Hoxton pointed ahead before falling back. "They're beyond that bend," he whispered. "I'll wait in the brush. If I hear trouble, I'll come from the ridge and flank them." Reyna thanked him quietly. Then she and Orion moved forward, silence stretching around them like a fragile thread ready to snap. As they rounded the bend, they saw the men. 3 stood guard. Another kept Talon forced to the ground near the rocks. His hands were bound, but his back remained straight. And even from a distance, Reyna could see the steady fire in his eyes. Her breath caught as she whispered his name. One of the guards heard. The sound had spun around. "There. Bring her forward." Reyna stepped out from behind the rocks before Orion could stop her. She raised her hands to show she carried no weapon. "I'm here," she said. Talon lifted his head sharply. "Reyna, no. Get back." But she didn't move. She walked toward them with quiet, trembling resolve. The leader stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "So you finally came." "Let him go," Reyna said. "I'm the one you want." The man studied her with cold satisfaction. "You saw something on that ridge years ago. Something our employer wants. Tell us where he hid the ledger." Reyna frowned. "I don't know anything about a ledger." "That's what they all say," the man replied. "But you were there? The man we chased that night threw the ledger down the slope. Someone picked it up, and you were the only soul on that ridge besides him and Orion?" Reyna shook her head firmly. "I never saw a ledger. I didn't even know he dropped anything." Orion stepped out with his rifle raised. "She's telling the truth. The stranger was injured. He fled downhill before dropping anything. She never touched it." The leader turned his gaze toward Orion. "Then where is it?" Orion took a slow, steady breath. "I hid it. Not her." Reyna's eyes widened. The guards shifted, uneasy. Talon stared, understanding dawning slowly. The leader's jaw tightened. "Where?" Orion nodded toward a narrow trail above the canyon wall. "High ridge, behind the old cedar. I hid it to keep them away from her, but she never knew." The man hesitated. Suspicion flickered in his eyes. "If we climb that ridge and find nothing, this ends badly." Reyna stepped forward. "Then take me with you. If he lies, you'll see it with your own eyes." "No," Talon said sharply. "She isn't going anywhere with you." The leader grabbed her arm. "She comes. If she's lying, you both pay." Talon lurched toward them, but the guards held him back. Reyna turned to him, her voice steady. "Trust me," he shook his head. "I do. But I don't trust them." Reyna drew in a deep breath. "It will end tonight. One way or another." The men pulled her toward the ridge trail. Orion followed closely, his hand tightening on his rifle. Talon struggled against the ropes until one of the guards finally tied him tighter, forcing him back to the ground. The trail was narrow and steep, jagged rocks jutting from the slope. The climb felt endless, the air thin and cool. At the top stood an old cedar tree, its branches twisted from age. Reyna watched as Orion knelt beside the tree, pulling away fallen branches. Beneath them, wrapped in old cloth, lay the ledger. The leader crouched down and opened it. His eyes widened with triumph. "You were telling the truth," Orion exhaled with relief. But before the man could stand, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Hoxton's whistle, warning. The leader spun around. Confused, just as Hoxton burst onto the ridge from above, firing a single shot into the air. The guards below scrambled, unsure where the attack came from. Orion grabbed Reyna's arm. "Run. Now." They raced down the trail as chaos erupted behind them. Shouts echoed off the canyon walls. Hoxton drew the guards' attention, giving them a chance to reach Talon. Reyna sprinted toward him, her heart pounding. Talon looked up in shock as she fell to her knees beside him, hands shaking as she loosened the ropes. "You came back," he whispered. "I will always come back," she said. Voice breaking, Orion slid down beside them, pulling the last knot free. Talon rose. Staggering but strong enough to stand between Reyna and the danger, Hawkson rushed toward them from the ridge, breathing hard. They're retreating. Once they got the ledger, they realized fighting wasn't worth the cost. Reyna leaned into Talon, her legs trembling. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing. That stops me from holding you," he said softly. Lyra suddenly appeared from behind Hawkson, tears streaking down her face. "I couldn't stay at the ranch. I had to see you both safe." Talon wrapped one arm around Reyna and reached his other hand to steady Lyra. "We're all safe now." Reyna looked at Orion. "Thank you. For everything," he smiled faintly. "You two were always meant to walk the same road. I just cleared the stones where I could." As the night settled over the canyon, the danger faded into the distance. The threats that had chased Reyna for years were gone, the ledger recovered, and her truth finally spoken. Back at the ranch, the lamps glowed warmly through the windows. Reyna stood with Talon in the yard, the air cool and still around them. "You risked your life for me," she said quietly. "I chose you," Talon replied. "Not the admired sister. Not the easy path. I chose the woman with strength beneath her fear. The woman who stands even when the world tries to push her aside." I felt her heart swell. "And I choose you." He pulled her close, resting his forehead gently against hers. "You didn't cast me aside," she whispered. "You found me." Talon smiled, lifting her chin. "You were never lost. You were only waiting for someone who saw you clearly." Lyra watched from the porch, wiping her eyes. For the first time, she felt peace instead of envy. She finally understood that love was not a competition. It was a quiet truth that lived where it was meant to. Orion mounted his horse, ready to ride out at first light. Hawkson clapped his shoulder. "You did good tonight," Orion nodded. "They'll leave her alone now. That's all that matters." As he rode into the horizon, Reyna leaned into Talon's arms, the weight of her past lifting gently from her shoulders. The ranch felt different now, safer, warmer, like a place where healing could take root. Talon kissed the top of her head. "This is our land now, our home. Nothing will take that from us." With the danger behind them and the future stretching wide and open, Reyna finally felt free, loved, seen, chosen, and under the quiet old American sky. With the wind carrying the promise of new beginnings, she knew their story was only just beginning.